Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. The 14-point Iran-US peace plan revealed as senior US officials claim major win, but Tehran says it will charge ships going through the strait. Lebanon is emerging as a key test of the US-Iran agreement, with Israel yet to clarify its position. And Macron hails the US alignment with G7 summit, shared commitment on Ukraine. First this morning, a significant breakthrough appears to have been reached between Washington and Tehran, with the US and Iran signing a memorandum of understanding aimed at ending hostilities and launching talks on a permanent agreement. Let's go to this report.
US President Donald Trump signed the Iran Memorandum of Understanding at the Palace of Versailles on Thursday at the G7 summit, just prior to a dinner hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron. Before Trump's statement, Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Esmail Baghaei had announced that a memorandum of understanding with the United States has been finalized and signed electronically by both sides.
The Iran-US Memorandum of Understanding is now officially complete and finalized, since it has been signed by both sides. The Farsi document is similar to the English one and was signed by the other party.
The memorandum includes an immediate end to the war on all fronts, including Lebanon, the full resumption of maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, the lifting of a US blockade of Iranian ports, the waiving of US sanctions on Iran, the unfreezing of its assets, and a plan worth $300 billion for the economic rehabilitation of the Islamic Republic. Once implementation of the MOU begins, the US and Iran will start negotiations for a final deal. The document also states that the final agreement will be endorsed by a binding UN Security Council resolution. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said on X that the leaders of the US and Iran had signed the Memorandum of Understanding, and as a first step, Islamic Republic of Iran will instantly reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States of America will immediately lift the naval blockade. The meeting between American and Iranian delegations, headed by Vice President Vance and Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, is still expected to take place as planned Friday in Switzerland.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we stick with our first headline this morning. And what you're seeing on your screen is the actual signing of the document of the Memorandum of Understanding that took place yesterday evening in Versailles, with President Donald Trump there, and then you can see President Emmanuel Macron of France. Behind him is US State Secretary Marco Rubio, all there signing the document and the agreement. Now what we know is that President Trump has now formally signed it, which is now set to open the Strait of Hormuz while attending the G7 summit. Now this is a 14-point agreement, and on CNN it now has the 14-point US-Iran peace plan annotated, and I'm going to go through exactly what those points are, because now that it's been released we can provide more meat on the bone as to what both sides are agreeing to. Now, in this, it also commits a $300 billion fund for the reconstruction and economic development for the country, although the US is not required to contribute. But let's scroll down now and go to the first point so that you can see exactly what it is that I'm referring to, because here's some of what we know about the key points. And the first point just coming up right now that you're going to be able to see on your screen in the next couple of moments is the fact that the first paragraph of the agreement, here we are, notes that the US, Iran and allies will declare an immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, which is a key area, just because we know that Israeli military troops are still occupying parts of southern Lebanon. So that's the first part in this 14-point. Let's go down to the second one. The next one, and you guys can just keep scrolling down so I can catch up with you. So the US and Iran will respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's the second point, and refrain from interfering in each other's sides in internal affairs. The third point then moves over to the US and Iran will commit to navigating and achieving a final deal in a maximum of 60 days. So it's 60 days from now on. The next point number 4, once the MOU is signed, which it was yesterday evening, the US will begin removing its naval blockade and any disturbances or impediments that have been placed on Iranian ports. Point number 5, Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts to allow safe passage of commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz with no charge. Now, this is a tricky area because I'm going to come back to it in a moment. Number 6, the US and regional partners will develop a definitive mutual agreed plan worth at least $300 billion for the reconstruction and economic development in Iran. Point number 7, the US will terminate all economic sanctions against Iran. Point number 8, Iran has agreed to not procure or buy a nuclear weapon, and both sides have agreed to deal with the enriched uranium Tehran already has, as you can see there, point number 8 on your screen. And then we go to point number 9 and 10 because they're kind of butchered in together, because the following two is of the agreement that specifies that the US and Iran agree to a status quo of its nuclear program in the meantime until the enriched uranium can be dealt with. So that's a kind of 2-in-1, so that's 9 and 10. And then if we move over down to 11, point 11 now on your screen, Iran has long insisted that its frozen assets be released, offering the country another economic lifeline. So that's another point in there. And then the last point, point 14, I hope I haven't jumped there. I think I said 11, I didn't say 12 or 13, but we've mixed it up into 9 and 10. But the last one, which is, there we are, 12, agree the excessive mechanism that will be established to monitor the successful implementation of everything. There we have it. And then 13 implements points number 1, 4, and 5, which you would have seen previously before that I read out. And if we go to the last point, which is point number 14, which says that the US and Iran will establish a mechanism to monitor the implementation of the memorandum of understanding compliance with a future deal, though it's unclear what that will look like in the future. And just to add to this, Iran is saying that it's not actually going to return to pre-war conditions when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, and actually will charge ships to transit through the waterway after the 60-day toll-free period is achieved. And that's what a senior administration official has said. But it's still quite interesting. Obviously, things are still quite tentative at the moment. But critics over this particular deal argue that the deal only achieves a lot less than what Barack Obama had negotiated with Iran in 2015, saying that it's actually not up to scratch, not what they would have considered at all, and not a major win for the US. But there you go. That's what's in the 14-point plan at the moment, and we'll provide you with more information as we get it. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on the Guardian website in relation to G7, because Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, hails US alignment with G7's shared commitment on Ukraine. So Emmanuel Macron has said that the whole of the G7, including the US, recognizes the territorial integrity of Ukraine, as he held a re-synchronization of positions on the issue. And the French Prime Minister welcomed a very deep change in the US approach, saying that US President Donald Trump and all the leaders present at the G7 summit understood that Vladimir Putin was not interested in peace. Macron repeatedly emphasized a shared commitment to making progress on the issue, which he has described as a very profound shift and remobilization of the G7. Now, the annual G7 meetings bring together leaders of the world from the biggest economies, and the US, France, Germany, Italy, the UK, Canada, and Japan were all in attendance. And now those comments that Macron made were in sharp contrast to last year's G7, when the chasm between Trump's courtship of Putin, when they were liaising together, and Trump was seeing him less as a threat, and European support for Kyiv was marked that the US president actually walked out early and there was no attempt to agree on a final statement. So now this year is a lot different and marks a bigger shift that Trump is making more towards the West rather than Russia. And Trump has also met with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky twice on the margins of the summit, which also goes to show just how different their relationship was last year when there was a whole very public split and divisive interaction between the two leaders when Volodymyr Zelensky visited Trump in the White House. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning. As you can see there, the two presidents. But anyway, as you move on to our next story, it's all about the World Cup, really. And as I mentioned, we will be discussing this over the programme because it falls into our timeline. So the BBC has posted a win for England 4-2 over Croatia. So England were able, this is their we still have a president's speech, which we're going to give you right now.
Statement by His Excellency Mr. Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan.
Dear Mr. Chairman of Islamic Development Bank Group, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, I greet all the participants of the annual meeting. Welcome to Azerbaijan. I am very grateful to the group and its chairman and the whole team for selecting Azerbaijan as a host country for annual meeting. It's a big honor for us, and once again it demonstrates the strong bonds between us. I'd like personally thank Mr. Chairman Dr. Al-Jasser for his continued support to the reforms in Azerbaijan, for his vision in moving the bank to the future, and to his cordial attitude to our country. Dr. Al-Jasser visited Azerbaijan already many times, and also twice visited the liberated territories, which is a special pleasure for all of us. As you know, Azerbaijan hosts the annual meeting for the second time. This also is a clear demonstration of our close ties, the level of cooperation, and the scope of joint activity. I remember very well 2010, when we were the host country for the first time. And that annual meeting gave a strong boost to our partnership with the group, and also to the reforms Azerbaijan was implementing in order to diversify economy, conduct reforms, and reduce dependence on the energy sector. Many things have changed since that time in Azerbaijan and around. One of the things which hasn't changed is Azerbaijan's stable, successful development. And this is a demonstration of the policy we conduct, a policy based on our national interests, in good relations with all actors on the global international arena, and with a strong commitment to our successful development. Successful development is based on a variety of factors. Azerbaijan is only 35 years independent, and except first 2 years of war, occupation, humanitarian catastrophe, civil war, and other difficulties, the rest was a stable development of the country, and this is one of the main prerequisites for success for every country. Where stability is undermined, we cannot talk even about development. So stability, political, economic, social stability, which today is a reality of Azerbaijan, is not only the main factor for our development, but also it is a factor of regional development. Because with the strong ties in the regional scale and also on global arena, Azerbaijan already became an important actor in many aspects. Our independent foreign policy gained strong support in the international community. The number of our friends is growing year after year. And the support from the international community is reflected in a very illustrative moments when our candidacy was among the list of candidates for different institutions, and we got overwhelming support. That was the case when we were candidate for United Nations Security Council some years ago and got the support of 155 countries. That was the case when we were the candidate for the chair of non-aligned movement, second largest after United Nations international institution, consisting of 120 countries, and unanimously we've been elected. And not only elected, but also our chairmanship was unanimously prolonged. So this is a demonstration of international support. Sometimes when we hear the words like international community, some may think it's kind of a limited group of countries, developed countries, which, awarded themselves with this name. But this is a wrong approach. International community is a whole world, is a country, it's the members of United Nations. And to gain support of absolute majority of countries of the world, this really demonstrates, as I already said, respect based on practical steps, not only based on statements. We were the successful host country for many international events since 2010 annual meeting of ISDB group. Among the recent ones, I would name the successful COP29 held in 2024 with remarkable results. And also last month, World Urban Forum, one of the big international gatherings, also successfully was held in Azerbaijan, and many more to come. So this once again demonstrates a diversified agenda of our activity. Azerbaijan became an important actor on global energy arena, initiating and financing and implementing large-scale energy infrastructure projects which connect countries across Eurasia, which provide necessary energy supply to those who need it, especially in the times when energy supply chains are not safe, and when energy security becomes one of the main factors for every country's national security. Very positive investment policy allowed to attract billions of investments in different areas, including in the energy area, and construction of the pipelines which connect Caspian Sea with Mediterranean, with Black Sea, which connect Caspian offshore gas fields with European markets. This really needed a lot of efforts. Diplomacy, political contacts, good relations with neighbors, with the neighbors of our neighbors, financing, good reputation, and resilient economy. So the combination of these factors allowed Azerbaijan now to be one of the important energy suppliers. With respect to supply of natural gas, today Azerbaijan is #1 from point of view of geography of supply of gas by pipelines. We supply natural gas to 16 countries, and the number is growing year after year and will continue to grow. Oil supplies cover even more countries, and this is all to the benefit of producers, transitors, consumers. So a kind of a teamwork which has been created really is unique in the sense of complexity of the implementation of projects from point of view of financing, point of view of terrain, point of view of different political obstacles which we had in front of us. Investing largely in infrastructure, we also concentrated not only on infrastructure inside the country, but also infrastructure inside the country which has international dimension. In other words, we tried to transform Azerbaijan from landlocked country, as you know, we don't have access to world oceans, to an international transportation hub, to use our geography as a foundation for building strong transportation infrastructure. Because geography, of course, is important, but if it is not added with infrastructure, it doesn't mean a lot. So today, east-west and north-south corridors crossing Azerbaijan provide very important supply routes for a growing number of countries. And if one just looks at the map, can see that Azerbaijan is situated between Europe and Asia. And geographical location, of course, is depending on the agenda, can be a headache, can be an advantage. In our case, it's really advantage not only for us, but for many more countries. And today, the corridors, which I already mentioned, crossing Azerbaijan, really create a kind of a connected and coordinated transportation arteria for many countries. And of course, a lot is to be done, and this is, by the way, one of our priorities. Economic development of Azerbaijan was positive, and as I said, economy is stable. We managed to attract more than $350 billion of investments, direct investments, almost half from foreign sources in the last 20 years. And our investment plans continue because today investors look for stable places. Unfortunately, by the time passes, the number of stable locations does not grow. This is unfortunate today's reality. Therefore, good investment climate, investment protections, legislative base, and also already accomplished projects allow us to attract investments now, not only in energy, but non-energy sector, which is, by the way, one of our priorities. We spoke about that 16 years ago at the ISDB annual meeting in Baku. And since that time, we managed to transform. So today, the share of non-oil and gas sector in our GDP is more than 70%, which is a remarkable achievement. But still, we have to work hard in order to continue to change the balance of oil, gas, and non-oil and gas sector in our export. Today, absolute majority of our export are energy resources. So we are working very hard in order to change the situation. And for that, of course, we need more reforms, more investments, and also we need new markets. And this is a problem because the struggle for markets become very, how to say, very active, I would use this word. So diversification of economy is already a reality, but we have to continue, definitely. We managed to reduce our foreign debt. That was a target put by me some years ago, and we achieved, and even maybe more than we planned. Today, our foreign debt is only 6% of our GDP. So we started to borrow again. There was a break, but we started to borrow again. And of course, the first financial institution whom we approached was Islamic Development Bank, because of our strong connections, because of our shared history and very productive and constructive relationship. And during the meeting, many agreements will be signed in order to give a boost to new infrastructure projects, which in their turn will lead to added value in the non-oil sector. So low level of foreign debt, of course, is a big advantage. So we can borrow more, but we will do it very cautiously. Though today our foreign currency exchange reserves exceed our foreign debt almost 20%. 20 times, I'm sorry, almost 20 times. And by this figure, I think Azerbaijan is one of the leading countries with a very stable financial situation, balanced budget, and what also is appreciated by the leading rating agencies like Moody's and Fitch, which upgraded recently our ratings up to the investment grade, and with the prognosis forecast positive and stable. So we don't foresee any complications with respect to our economic development. And in line with that, hand by hand, goes our social programs, which are large scale. We implemented several social support packages in the last several years, which cover almost even more than 30% of our population. Reduction of poverty and unemployment also was one of the targets which has been successfully achieved. So today the level of poverty and unemployment is around 5%. And issues related to employment always will be in the center of our attention, as for any other country with a growing population. Because when population grows, we all know, unfortunately, in the Muslim countries, this tendency continues. We all know, but at the same time, it brings along with it a lot of challenges, because you have to create jobs, you have to create more of social infrastructure and infrastructure in general. So this will always be in the center of our attention, so to keep the level of unemployment very low. Of course, one of the main changes which happened since we had a meeting in 2010 was a restoration of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Our lands were occupied in the beginning of the 90s. That created a humanitarian catastrophe. We had 1 million refugees and internally displaced persons. In the beginning of the 90s, at that time, our population was 8 million. So 1 of 8 was refugee, homeless, jobless, without any means for living. So that was a real humanitarian catastrophe, and we were left alone. Armenia, which committed war crimes, Khojaly genocide, destroyed our citizen villages, conducted urbicide on the occupied territories, was not sanctioned. Today we hear about sanctions. Sanctions, sanctions, we hear every day. As soon as something happens, immediately sanctions have been imposed. But no one imposed sanctions on Armenia. And this is a clear demonstration of the double standards, clear demonstration about difference between proclaimed so-called values and real politics. If Armenia was sanctioned because of violation of international law, occupation of territory of sovereign country, committing war crimes, then the conflict between two countries wouldn't have lasted so long. It lasted for almost 30 years. And during these 30 years, there were numerous rounds of useless, endless, meaningless negotiations, which had only one aim for those who were providing so-called umbrella for negotiations, only one aim: to keep our lands under Armenian occupation forever. That was the goal of those who had a mandate to achieve peace and achieve liberation of our territories. I mean the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs, 3 countries, 3 permanent members of UN Security Council, France, Russia, United States. And can you imagine that these countries could not force Armenia to liberate Azerbaijani territory? No, of course not. They did not want. They wanted our land to be under Armenian occupation. That was their joint decision. But we changed those plans. We've been very hopeful in the beginning of the negotiation process. And me personally, I'm a president since 2003. And for 17 years, I was involved, as I already said, in this useless, as it happened, negotiations, trying to find peaceful solution, trying to persuade big countries that truth is on our side. We are right. We are occupied. Look at the map. Look where Armenian forces are standing on our territory. And what we heard in response: go and agree. One message. Second message: there is no military solution. Third message: you cannot start war. Fourth message: if you start war, you will be sanctioned. And many more. Just don't want to take much of your time. So when we realized that those who make decisions in the world decided that our land should be illegally occupied forever, we made our decision and we changed all the plans. 2020 Liberation War lasted 44 days, ended in the capitulation of Armenia. We liberated large part of the occupied territories, but not all of it. Then in 2023, we put a final stop, final full stop. And now territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and sovereignty is fully restored, and this is accepted by the whole world. And after that, we offered Armenia peace. We, the winner, the country and the people who suffered from occupation and devastation, we offered them peace. And now we have this peace. So already for almost 1 year, we live in peace, and we see the benefits. We will never forget what Armenian occupational forces have done to our people, to our cities. We will never forget how they destroyed 65 mosques and kept animals, including pigs, in our mosques in order to insult our feelings. That cannot be forgotten. We will never forget Hocalı genocide, but We need to look to the future, and we took revenge on the battlefield, and that's enough. That war or wars should have stopped, and we stopped it. As a strong side, we stopped it and offered peace, so now peace is reality. Immediately after we liberated our territories, we started a large-scale reconstruction program. Today, already in Karabakh and Eastern Zangezur, almost 90,000 people live, work, study. We allocated from our state budget more than $15 billion to different infrastructure and housing projects. But from all sources, the volume of financing to liberated territories is close to $17 billion. Large-scale infrastructure projects are being implemented, including water storages, water canals, power stations, free international airports already commissioned, tunnels and bridges. And we are grateful to Islamic Development Bank Group for supporting our efforts in reconstruction of the liberated territories. This is one of the main priorities now for our government, but not the only. And I'm sure that during this time of interaction of the group, there have been a lot of discussions on that. Just want to underline a couple of our priorities for the future. One of them is, as already said, connectivity. We need to continue to transform Azerbaijan into a transportation hub. Our plan is to double the volume of cargo going through Azerbaijan. Today it's about 15 million tons. We look for doubling this figure. Of course, not everything will depend on us, because it will depend on also geopolitical situation, also situation in the neighborhood, but these are our plans. Our plans for food security are very clear with the recently adopted state program on agricultural development. We are planning to achieve a maximum self-sufficiency on the main consumption products. Irrigation, and I'm grateful to ISDB for helping us with irrigation. Building canals and water storages will allow the farmers to have access to water and to have more productivity of their products. Renewables is a big potential. Contracts signed already with international and local companies will provide us with 8 gigawatts of solar and wind energy by 2032. This is minimum. This is what has already been signed, and not MOUs, but contracts, but it will be more. So now we are working on transmission lines, how to export, because we will not need as much, as I said. So transmission lines to those destinations which need energy, and this is primarily Europe, definitely, because everybody knows that they will need electric energy for many, many years to come. So all this is in our strategic priority plans. And many other areas, and I'm sure that large part of our plans have been already communicated with the audience. Don't want to take much of your time. Once again, I'd like to express gratitude for selecting Azerbaijan as a host country, for being with us, for your support, and wish the annual meeting success. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak, and what you just saw there was breaking news of Azerbaijan President Ilham Aliyev, who addressed the opening ceremony of the Islamic Development Bank Group's 2026 annual meetings, which was held in Baku. Now, the Azerbaijani leader said the volume of cargo transported through Azerbaijan is expected to double as the country strengthens its role as a regional transport and logistical hub. Now we head over to the Middle East, and Lebanon has emerged as a key test of a new US-Iran agreement aimed at easing tensions across the region. But with Israel, Hezbollah and Lebanon's leaders all signaling different positions, questions remain over how the deal will be implemented. Here's more.
Attention is focused on Lebanon after details emerged of a memorandum signed between the United States and Iran. The agreement calls for an immediate and permanent end to military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, and says neither side should launch attacks or threats against the other. It also commits to respecting Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Meanwhile, Israel has not reacted to the signing of the peace deal, while a spokesperson for the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said any continuation of Israeli military operations in Lebanon would constitute a violation of the understanding. US President Donald Trump at the G7 summit in France on Wednesday said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu could use a softer touch in dealing with Hezbollah, reflecting Washington's concern that fighting in Lebanon could undermine the agreement.
You had a deal that was going to give them legally a nuclear weapon. And if that happened, Israel would have been blown away. And in all fairness to Bibi Netanyahu, who happens to be a good man, gets a little excited sometimes. But he happens to be a very good man. We've had an amazing partnership. He's been an amazing prime minister. We have a little dispute over Lebanon. I say, you can do a little softer touch, Bibi. You don't have to knock down a building every time somebody walks into it that's from Hezbollah.
Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem has rejected US-brokered proposals for pilot security zones, insisting any deal must guarantee reciprocal security. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu has fired back, insisting Israel is completely uncommitted to any US-Iran accord and reserves an absolute right to use military force. Lebanese leaders are expected to visit Washington in the coming weeks as negotiations continue towards a final settlement.
Now, G7 leaders have wrapped up their summit, with both Washington and Paris praising international cooperation as attention turns to the newly announced US-Iran peace deal and plans to sign it in Switzerland. Ross Collin reports from Evian.
Well, the G7 summit here in Evian in France has now come to a close after 3 days of discussions between the leaders from the UK, the US, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and Canada. The host President Emmanuel Macron gave a news conference after the conclusion of the summit, which he said had been held amid very difficult global circumstances, fragmentation, division and multiple crises and conflicts. But he said it had objectively been a success, with unanimous agreement from all of the leaders on 9 different communiques, different subject areas, including on Ukraine, Iran, economic growth and artificial intelligence. The US President Donald Trump also addressed the media after the end of the summit, saying that economic catastrophe had been avoided because of the agreements between the United States and Iran, the memorandum of understanding. He also hailed the US naval blockade as one of the most famous in history. That was what the United States imposed in response to Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump admitting that trying to recover already enriched uranium from inside Iran would be very difficult, and he also warned Tehran that if they did not abide by their commitments, the United States could very easily restart a bombing campaign. After the conclusion of the summit, Donald Trump was not immediately flying home. In fact, he'd been invited to dinner by Emmanuel Macron, but not in Evian. In fact, at the Golden Palace of Versailles, just outside Paris, as part of celebrations marking 250 years of US independence. Ross Cullen, A News in Evian.
Now, time for a quick break. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere.
Seoul's Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in a shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. The 14-point Iran-US peace plan revealed as senior US officials claim major win, but Tehran says it will charge ships going through the strait. Lebanon is emerging as a key test of US-Iran agreement, with Israel yet to clarify its position. And Macron hails US alignment with G7's shared commitment on Ukraine. Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to Deutschwell website and what's going on in Central Africa because of what the Ebola virus has been devastating parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now the EU Commission has now said, while at the G7 meeting this week in France, so that it was building on a support program worth nearly 493 million euros, which is roughly 580 million US dollars in humanitarian aid and health security in the middle of the latest Ebola outbreak centered around the Ituri province in the DRC. Now, this came a day, as I mentioned, after the G7 Leaders Summit appealed for more of a stronger and coordinated international response to the outbreak. And according to the DRC's government, the outbreak of the Ebola virus has now led to 837 confirmed cases and 196 deaths, 29 of those cases in a period of 24 hours. So you can definitely see how rapidly this virus is spreading and the devastation that it's causing. Now, the European Commission said that its funds and aid was a mixture of frontline medical support for the immediate response to the outbreak, and also added that the European health authorities still deem the risk to European citizens as low, but nevertheless, officials stress the importance of the operation, stating that this is a reminder that health security is shared security. And that's coming from the Commissioner, President Ursula von der Leyen, who said that, and added that countries can better protect their citizens if we all act together. And as you can see, we've had a number of reports in relation to the Ebola crisis and making sure that the burial of those who have unfortunately died from this terrible disease is done correctly in order to minimize the spread of the disease happening in the Ituri province and beyond. And we know that there's also cases, unfortunately, in Uganda, but thankfully that's where it has stayed for now. There hasn't been any more further reports of cases on the continent or further afield. Okay, now let's turn over to the next headline this morning, which is on the BBC website, and it's in relation to Apple, because it's now deciding to raise its prices. The headline reads, Apple to raise prices as AI boom pushes up chip prices. Now, what is this all about? As you can see here, you've got Tim Cook, who is the leaving head of Apple CEO, who will be leaving very shortly at the end of this year. But in a statement, Apple now plans to raise the prices due to the cost of memory chips, which has surged. And Tim Cook, Apple's outgoing chief executive, told the Wall Street Journal that price increases are unavoidable as the situation around memory chips has become unsustainable, is what he said. He did not say when the prices will rise or which products will be affected, and it was also unclear whether or not the price hikes will affect the iPhone 18, which is expected to be launched in September. But memory chips are essential components for the smart devices like mobile phones, the Apple Watch, etc. And the boom in AI has only driven up the prices in recent months. And Cook's comments only come after the technical giants have highlighted pressure in chip-making industry. So we'll provide you with more information as we know exactly what those hikes are and who will be impacted the most. Okay, now let's move over to our leading story this morning, and that's on our A News website, and that's in relation to US and Iran, who have signed a ceasefire deal as Trump warns attack could resume if the accord fails. And also on the BBC website, it's also leading there as well in relation to President Donald Trump also signing the deal when he was over in France for the G7 summit, and he actually signed that in Versailles in the lovely I'm trying to get all my words out to make sure that it was in a lovely Versailles building that President Emmanuel Macron was able to wine and dine him. So that's exactly where the signing was. We do have some more information into this, but it was a 14-point plan, as you can see here from the BBC. US and Iranian presidents signed deal in ending the war. Now, it was a 14-point plan which touches on a number of things. One of the most crucial things was the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which is going to be done almost immediately. However, Iran has actually added a caveat saying that after the 60-day negotiation period, they will be charging a fee, a surcharge for any vessels going through the strait. Now, it also means that the blockades will also end, which the US has put up on a number of Iranian ports there. As well as one key thing is for Lebanon and Israeli troops to be removed from there is also part of this 14-point plan agreement. But we'll go into that in more detail later on in the program. But let's take a look at our report that kind of rounds up all that's been done in relation to this signing.
US President Donald Trump signed the Iran Memorandum of Understanding at the Palace of Versailles on Thursday at the G7 summit, just prior to a dinner hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron. Before Trump's statement, Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Esmail Baghaei had announced that a memorandum of understanding with the United States has been finalized and signed electronically by both sides.
The Iran-US Memorandum of Understanding is now officially complete and finalized, since it has been signed by both sides. The Farsi document is similar to the English one and was signed by the other party.
The memorandum includes an immediate end to the war on all fronts, including Lebanon, the full resumption of maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, the lifting of a US blockade of Iranian ports, the waiving of US sanctions on Iran, the unfreezing of its assets, and a plan worth $300 billion for the economic rehabilitation of the Islamic Republic. Once implementation of the MOU begins, the US and Iran will start negotiations for a final deal. The document also states that the final agreement will be endorsed by a binding UN Security Council resolution. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said on X that the leaders of the US and Iran had signed the memorandum of understanding, and as a first step, Islamic Republic of Iran will instantly reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States of America will immediately lift the naval blockade. The meeting between American and Iranian delegations, headed by Vice President Vance and Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, is still expected to take place as planned Friday in Switzerland.
Now, Lebanon has emerged as a key test of a new US-Iran agreement aimed at easing tensions across the region. But with Israel, Hezbollah and Lebanon's leaders all signalling different positions, questions remain over how the deal will be implemented. Let's go to this report.
Attention is focused on Lebanon after details emerged of a memorandum signed between the United States and Iran. The agreement calls for an immediate and permanent end to military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, and says neither side should launch attacks or threats against the other. It also commits to respecting Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Meanwhile, Israel has not reacted to the signing of the peace deal, while a spokesperson for the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said any continuation of Israeli military operations in Lebanon would constitute a violation of the understanding. US President Donald Trump, at the G7 summit in France on Wednesday, said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu could use a softer touch in dealing with Hezbollah, reflecting Washington's concern that fighting in Lebanon could undermine the agreement.
You had a deal that was going to give them, legally, a nuclear weapon. And if that happened, Israel would have been blown away. And in all fairness to Bibi Netanyahu, who happens to be a good man, gets a little excited sometimes. But he happens to be a very good man. We've had an amazing partnership. He's been an amazing prime minister. We have a little dispute over Lebanon. I say, you can do a little softer touch, Bibi. You don't have to knock down a building every time somebody walks into it that's from Hezbollah.
Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem has rejected US-brokered proposals for pilot security zones, insisting any deal must guarantee reciprocal security. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu has fired back, insisting Israel is completely uncommitted to any US-Iran accord and reserves an absolute right to use military force. Lebanese leaders are expected to visit Washington in the coming weeks as negotiations continue towards a final settlement.
Staying on this topic, I'm now joined by political analyst Milay Demirtaş in Ankara to discuss the US-Iran deal and its impact on the Middle East. Welcome to the programme today. And good to have you back.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And good to have you back. We last spoke on Monday when the deal was first initialed and signed. And now we have the 14-point peace plan with a little bit more details. And I kind of want to delve into that. And one of the key points of that, which we just highlighted in our report before, is the issue of Lebanon and Hezbollah and Israel and the fighting going on in that. Now, part of that plan is for Israeli troops to leave and for all the fighting there to stop. How likely is that to take place? Because we know that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been quite firm about his stance on that, saying that this is an agreement between the US and Iran and not necessarily an agreement that is focused on Israel's military goals.
Yes, there are all the important points, and thank you again for having me. Yes, in our last program, we just mentioned something's really going on in a positive sense, in a positive maybe shape, in a diplomatic terms, at least after all these maybe conflicts. At least we saw some diplomatic sides. I mean, first, Mr. Trump, I think he, again, with his own style, made his, quote unquote, show maybe nowadays in France. It's different, of course, choosing the words. We know Mr. Trump can choose sometimes the words which much underlined as bombs. The rhetoric which are based on these bombs and the use of military force. And suddenly he turned, of course, to a diplomatic tone. It's his own style. We just maybe are knowing him, but we do not know, of course, as you said, this Israelis' attitudes. And because of this agreement turned to be so important. And surprisingly, they also make an opening statement up to before Switzerland. We are knowing all the details of this memorandum of understanding. It is not an agreement. First of all, we must underline, it is not this final diplomatic agreement is the memorandum of understanding, which means in diplomacy language, that decides just sitting together and just maybe talking and deciding about the final result. So we will see. And just in this time, as you said, the Lebanon will be the critical phase. Unfortunately, we already seen what's happening in Palestine for 2-3 years. And now Lebanon turns to be a very important social, maybe exam. I mean, it is an exam because we have many important societal groups. First of all, of course, groups linked with Hezbollah. And Mr. Netanyahu is just maybe using, because of this rhetoric of the culturalist, maybe religious rhetoric, so heavily. And I think Mr. Trump does not want to especially this tone of Mr. Netanyahu, and very openly he expressed it. It is a very, I think, gain in the diplomatic field, and we will see. This agreement really will bring some positive thing, at least for this sixth day.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned there, that the memorandum of understanding is just that. It's not a deal, so to speak. It's two parties coming together to kind of figure out where they go from here. But a part of that, as you mentioned, obviously, is the issue of Lebanon. But not even just that. We know that the whole of the world has been impacted by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which was a very big focal point for the war with Iran that the US really underestimated, and now that's going to be open. However, Tehran has now said that after the 60-day negotiation period has lapsed, they are going to introduce some form of a toll fee for ships passing through that. What does that mean? Because Trump has been very firm and very outlandish about making sure that no one is charged for that. But now things have turned. After the war, it seems that Iran is taking a very different approach to things and is actually going to introduce a toll on vessels going through the strait.
This is, yes, very tricky. I mean, the article and, of course, the way of Iran's always talking about Strait of Hormuz. But also, it is not so, strange or different than the diplomatic, especially abilities of some parties. If you look at the history of this diplomatic maybe clashes, of course, warlike times, any party has such a right to maybe upper the hands, to make a gain in the field or also on the table. So Iran maybe pushes, of course, the border now about this Strait of Hormuz. Yes, Iran and the officials just know that all the economy, from Europe, to Thailand, to even African and very developing economies, they're starting to be, affected very, very negatively, especially in this summer periods. Everyone needs something. Everyone needs some, of course, about fuel, oil, and some industrial maybe projects. But now Iran also uses this, of course, need of the world economies in its own for interests. It is very normal, but it is also for compensation, maybe reason, Ms. Nadia, because we know that this 300 billion, it is really, just you asked me in your last meeting, just this 300 billion, it is a real amount. It can be possible, you asked to me. And now in the document, we just saw, yes, 300 billion, it's a very huge sum. And we saw that on the document. Of course, Mr. Trump rejected that the United States will give such a lot of money, but he also accepted maybe on the document that the allies, all the maybe parties, regional parties, including I think Turkey, Azerbaijan, some other countries, Russia, will maybe help to build such an atmosphere for Iran. And so, till that time, maybe the Strait of Hormuz will be very tricky, very sensitive.
Yes, definitely. And that 300 million that you just referred to, US dollars, obviously it's payment for what the infrastructure that has, costed Iran, which also begs to differ the wider cost of the war that's cost the US, Israel, and a number of countries because of the Strait of Hormuz has actually shut. When we look back on this, who are the winners and losers in all of this? It doesn't seem that much has really moved in relation to the US getting what it wants, Israel getting what it wants, especially when it comes to the nuclear program or changing of government in Iran. What happens then? Because it just seems that on paper, nothing much has changed. And critics actually say that this is going to be a worse deal than what Obama negotiated in 2015 with Iran. What do you think of that?
I think, yes. I always say sometimes 50-50 is a good escape for 60-40. Or even 70-30, in favor of Iran. we can say Iran really showed a resistance, a real resistance on the field. It really affected, all the leaders, we can say, many important official personalities, they lost their lives with their families. We must not forget that the bombardments was so heavy. And now, even nowadays, the leaders cannot come to the public. Mr. Trump can make a very good, quote unquote, show in France, still in Versailles Palace, when the signing ceremony, I think, just took place. But look at Iranian sides. They cannot be, on the public. So that means that Iran really made a strategy. And at the end of the day, maybe it sacrificed something. It sacrificed, of course, the population, sacrificed some important, of course, places. Maybe we do not know still because of this media, maybe censorship, of course, of the Iranian structure, we all know. But still, yes, for the United States, it was a rational war, Ms. Nadia. And for Israel, I think the days will be much more surprising, and we will see, we will observe as the experts on the field.
Yes, and I think there'll be even more conversations ongoing, especially when it focuses back on Iran's nuclear program and how things will actually move in relation to that. Trump keeps saying they're going to have no more nuclear weapons. Whether or not that's, exactly the wording that will be used when they agree on a final peace deal is very much up in the air. But what do you think in relation to that with uranium production in Iran and what that actually entails? Will they be able to get some form of a deal with Iran in stopping that particular program?
Yes, you just rightly mentioned, we can say 4 pillars or 4 important points on the agreement, like 4 chapters. First, Lebanon, and then economic compensation, Strait of Hormuz. And this issue is another issue, which is nuclear enrichment, uranium enrichment. And it, of course, will continue. It's an important, sensitive topic. But on the document, maybe you also look at the document, and we see that directly and very openly this atomic agency, these United Nations bodies, which still, of course, be chaired by very successful, diplomat by Rafael Grossi. I think important, body, important institution, and we are really hopeful that such an international responsibility, such an international body will be on the field, and Iran a good willingness and also diplomacy to this party. United Nations, first of all, and I think United States will not reject or will not maybe oppose to this option that Iran also has some rights to make it peacefully and to make it in an evolutionary base. And in this evolutionary phases, we will see that Iran will be much more in a peaceful mode. Actually, we hope so. Yeah, well, that just also highlights that it's gone full circle, because that's exactly what Iran has always wanted, to make something peacefully, is what they've said. We know, with minimal kind of restrictions. But thank you so much, Mr. Demirtas, for speaking to me and for going through that. It's been much helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Now we turn over to the UK, and it marks the 10th anniversary of the Brexit referendum. Political debate over the country's relationship with the European Union is returning to the spotlight now, with parties restating their positions on future relations with the bloc. We now head to our correspondent, Zainab Faridza, who reported on this from Manchester.
As the UK approached the 10th anniversary of the Brexit referendum on 23rd June, political debate over the country's relationship with the European Union is returning to the forefront. Recent polling from Ipsos suggests 58% of likely voters will support rejoining the European Union, while support for close economic ties with the bloc has increased in recent years. The anniversary is prompting renewed discussion among political parties about the UK's future relationship with Brussels. In a speech on Wednesday, Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey called on Labour to reconsider its position on joining the customs union and the single market. He said close economic ties with the EU would benefit the UK and criticised Labour's current approach to post-Brexit policy. Davey outlined proposals for UK participation in the European single market through the European Free Trade Association, alongside negotiations on a new customs union with the EU. He said the plan would reduce trade barriers and strengthen economic links with the European partners. The proposals would require the UK to accept freedom of movement, a condition associated with single market participation and one opposed by both the Conservatives and Reform UK. The Liberal Democrats have consistently argued for closer alignment with the EU since Brexit. Also, their approach has varied during recent election campaigns. The debate comes ahead of a UK-EU summit scheduled for 22nd July, where Prime Minister Keir Starmer and European leaders are expected to discuss efforts to reset post-Brexit relations. Zena Farisada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Now over to Eastern Europe, and one person has been killed in a Russian drone attack on the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy, as Moscow launched a fresh wave of missile and drone strikes across the country overnight. Air raid alerts were issued across much of Ukraine, while authorities in Kyiv urged residents to take shelter as the capital came under missile attack. The strikes came just hours after President Volodymyr Zelensky held talks with the US President Donald Trump and European leaders. In Sumy, emergency crews battled fires at multiple locations hit by drone strikes and worked to assess the damage. Over in France, G7 leaders wrapped up their summit with both Washington and Paris praising international cooperation as attention turns to the newly announced US-Iran peace deal and plans to sign it in Switzerland. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports from Evian.
Well, the G7 summit here in Evian in France has now come to a close after 3 days of discussions between the leaders from the UK, the US, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and Canada. The host President Emmanuel Macron gave a news conference after the conclusion of the summit, which he said had been held amid very difficult global circumstances, fragmentation, division and multiple crises and conflicts. But he said it had objectively been a success, with unanimous agreement from all of the leaders on 9 different communiques, different subject areas, including on Ukraine, Iran, economic growth and artificial intelligence. The US President Donald Trump also addressed the media after the end of the summit, saying that economic catastrophe had been avoided because of the agreement between the United States and Iran, the memorandum of understanding. He also hailed the US naval blockade as one of the most famous in history. That was what the United States imposed in response to Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump admitting that trying to recover already enriched uranium from inside Iran would be very difficult, and he also warned Tehran that if they did not abide by their commitments, the United States could very easily restart a bombing campaign. After the conclusion of the summit, Donald Trump was not immediately flying home. In fact, he'd been invited to dinner by Emmanuel Macron, but not in Evian. In fact, at the Golden Palace of Versailles, just outside Paris, as part of celebrations marking 250 years of US independence. Ross Cullen, A News in Evian.
Now let's turn to the FIFA World Cup, which is already delivering compelling storylines. One of those was with Cape Verde drawing with favourite Spain this week. France beat Senegal in its first match, and England came out strong with a win over Croatia 4-2. Now let's speak to Adbir Singh, a sports lawyer from New Delhi in India. Welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. So my first question in this is that there's been so much going on. It's a week today since the tournament launched, and we've been seeing so many teams come to the plate and really give their heart's best in playing against a number of different countries. What has been some of the key or outstanding moments you've seen so far this week, now that we're into the games?
Yeah, it's obviously been a World Cup that's been marred with a little bit of controversy off the pitch, but I think the environment and I think the passion shown by a lot of the smaller countries has been something that's really maybe saved face for the World Cup a little bit. When you're seeing, countries like Cape Verde, their fans, Congo last night who got a point against Portugal. I think an expanded World Cup was a little bit controversial initially, but I think you're seeing maybe the fruition of why it's been expanded to include the smaller countries which, have sometimes never qualified, or, are playing almost after 50 plus years. So I think it's done a world of good for global football in general.
Definitely, as you mentioned, the smaller countries definitely getting some form of credibility on a very big and global stage. Now, we know that it's one of the biggest World Cup tournaments, which has been split between three countries, Canada, America and Mexico. But what are the biggest legal and governance challenges facing FIFA and the host nations today? What is it that they're actually coming up against with all of that?
Yeah, so again, as I mentioned, a lot of off-pitch controversies even before, a single ball was kicked for the event. It started with, Iran, for example, who weren't allowed to stay, on US soil for the duration of the tournament, even though their base was due to be in the US. So very controversial, obviously, with all the issues going on, politically between the two countries. And, you would think it's such a global stage where, football is supposed to be at, the forefront. It's been marred by, the politics has taken over a little bit, where Iran, it's a bit of a shame that they have to almost fly out within an hour and a half of their match being finished, which is, certainly a disadvantage to them in terms of their recovery, etc., to the players, and not really fair, on a country that has done their best to qualify for a massive event. Other controversies have included, it's not just down to countries, even down to, officials at the matches. I'm sure everyone would have heard of the Somalian referee, who, of course, was picked to be a referee of the FIFA World Cup, which is, again, by no means, a small feat. These are the best referees in the world who are vetted. They go through rigorous selection process. And despite landing on US soil, was, turned back to Somalia. Of course, the US government has given their reasons of why they've done that. Somalia is considered a red list country for them. But again, marring, it's a bit of a stain on the entire tournament. Indeed.
And just very quickly, because we don't have you very long, I don't want to take away from the fact that you are placed in India right now. And India is a massive country, 1.4 billion people, but there's no representation on the World Cup this year. And it's quite interesting that, you're very known for cricket, but maybe not so much for football. Why is that? And is that something that India is trying to kind of combat and make sure that's something, they attend the World Cup next 4 years, maybe?
Yeah, good question. So look, obviously with the World Cup being expanded, I think it's, lit this fire in a lot of, Indians that these are some of the smallest nations in the world who have a population of, less than 100 million. Why are we as a country with 1.5 billion almost not able to get to the World Cup? So it's a long process. I think we have to invest a lot more in the grassroots level. There's a lot of work that has to be done by the governing bodies here. And, do I see India at the next FIFA World Cup? A little bit too soon, but I think you need a proper, 10, 20-year vision to then really make that a reality. But it's in the works, and a World Cup like this only inspires us to get there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Singh, for coming onto the programme and explaining that for me. Hopefully we'll have more stories that will be coming out of the World Cup and more wins. So thank you so much. Now, let's take a look at some of the World Cup scoring points this week, because football has brought a variety of performances, as we just mentioned, from leading contenders. Now, there were some convincing wins for Argentina, Germany, and ultimately France, but disappointingly, some draws for Brazil against Morocco, and particularly Spain against Cape Verde and Portugal against the DR of Congo. Now we go to Group K, which you can see on your screens. Portugal and DR Congo, they drew 1-1. We head over to Group L, and England beat Croatia 4-2 this morning. Group K, Uzbekistan versus Colombia, and unfortunately Uzbekistan did not beat Colombia. It was a 1-3 result. And then we go to Group L, Ghana versus Panama, and Ghana was able to score 1 goal just before the final bell. So congratulations to them. And as you can see, those are the results on your screen. Well, those are the top stories for the day. Thank you so much for joining me, and make sure you stay tuned to A News for a number of updates throughout the day. I'll be back tomorrow morning to provide you with a new set of stories that you need to make sure that you're across, and I'll be there to help you with it. Don't go anywhere and stay tuned to A News.